Well, thank you again for joining today's Business as Unusual webinar series, where we are talking to badass industry leaders who are helping us survive and thrive in today's economic climate. My name is Lisa Baining. I'm one of Red Caffeine's account managers, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. We are very excited to have best-selling author and workplace futurist Marti Konstant joining us today, as well as Kathy Steele, principal and owner of Red Caffeine. I'll go ahead and introduce them in just a moment, but would like to cover a few housekeeping things first. Today's webinar is really meant to be an interactive conversation, and I cannot stress that enough. So throughout the session, please go ahead and add your questions into the chat feature or the QA option. You can access those on the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to actually ask a question live, we are going to open that up today. So either let me know in the chat that you have a question, or you can also use the raise hand option, and we'll go ahead and unmute your line so you can ask a question of Marti and Kathy. We will be taking questions and answering them throughout today's session. So I really encourage you to be interactive, be in the chat function, really communicating, because we're hoping you will get a lot out of this session today. With that, I also wanted to give a shout out, since we are trying to support other businesses during this economic climate, especially our restaurants who have been so hard hit. We did give out free lunch to the first 5 registrants today, who were Bernice, Larry, John, Maureen, and Arlene. I see Arlene already placed her order for Delicias de Abuela in Tamarack, Florida. So glad to see a participant from coast to coast today. We even have a few people signing on from South Africa. So wonderful to see that we are now on an international scale. So again, let's make this a wonderful conversation, very interactive, very enjoyable for all of us. Now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers. So first, going to start off with Kathy, our host for today's session. Recently, Kathy told us she is a badass, because that's where we are at Red Caffeine. She is passionate about people, obsessed with helping businesses grow, and loving to support the underdog causes in our communities. As a business leader, Kathy is an educated risk taker who persevered through challenging economic conditions and a business divorce to become a 2-time honoree at Inc. magazine's annual list of America's fastest growing private companies. So Kathy, as I said, will be our host today. And now for our honored guest, Marti Konstant. Marti shared with us before our session today a couple of questions. Can you adapt to the accelerated pace of change to stay relevant in today's world? Our guest, Marti, really researches how people respond and adapt to change in the workplace, our focus for today's session. As a top career influencer, she has uncovered the one trait that helps you and your organization flourish and not flounder in today's fast-pacing and fast-changing environment. As I mentioned earlier, she's a workplace futurist, keynote speaker, and best-selling author. And as you're going to hear from her today, her core belief is adapt or get left behind. A few personal things about Marti. As a runner and mountain hiker across several continents, movement and mobility are central themes that she'll also talk about today. Yet there's one cherished moment that really stands out and stops her in her tracks. She has met and hugged a toddler panda in China, and I'm hoping we'll get to hear a little more about that as well. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to Kathy and our guest, Marti.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Well, Marti, I'm so excited to have you here today. As we sort of touched on when we were prepping a few minutes ago, we have this incredibly sort of intertwined network of people that we know, but this is the first time we've ever really met. So I'm really excited to learn from you today. But you've got the most badass job title I've ever heard of. I actually Googled it and it confirmed it's like the coolest job in the world. But tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get in, how did you get into this line of work, and just tell us a little bit about the story of your career journey.
Yeah, so that's a really perfect question, Kathy. One of the ways that I got into it started a long, long time ago, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But the thing that as was said in the brief introduction here, is I've been very focused and concentrated on the topic of mobility and agility. And something happened to me when I was really younger that immobilized me, and that is why I got so engaged with this topic.
All right. So Did want to ask one poll question before we get kicked off, just to kind of catch the tempo of our attendees today. So how are you watching this webinar today? Are you standing up? Marty, are you standing up?
I'm standing up.
Okay, I'm sitting down. And are you wearing are you wearing sweatpants or workout clothes? And you can't choose, it has to be either or.
Yes, you cannot choose standing up and wearing sweatpants. If you are wearing sweatpants or workout clothes, choose number 3.
We'll give everyone just a moment. So yes, as they said, only one answer, but just trying to get a pulse on our audience today. We were talking about this earlier. All of us for the presentation decided we had to be on our best today, so we're dressed up, but would love to see where everybody else is at today as well.
Yes, I'm donning a pair of heels for the first time in like 6 months. So it's a special day for some reason. Had a bust.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. I see we have the majority of our audience here and sharing our results. So overall, sitting down. So I think 2 out of the 3, Kathy and I, are doing that. Marty's on the standing up side. And thank you for the one person who said they are wearing sweatpants and workout clothes, because I'm sure the rest of us are in that same mode as well.
For sure. And there's another question I would like to add, but not a poll one. And it would be something that you could comment in the chat, or we could take it later, but if you could put it in the chat, why did you decide to attend a presentation or conversation on agility today? What was it about the topic that attracted you here today? So if you can put that in the comments, it would be great. And while you're doing that, I would like to address one question I always get when we have a Zoom meeting and I am participating. And it's, Marty, what are all those sticky notes on the wall behind you? And they're a part of a branding exercise that I did last year, and I loved everything that was written on them so much. I saved them. And during this Corona time, I thought what a great thing to do is to put all of those wonderful words and expressions behind me. So I'm surrounded by all this positivity and brand values all day. So that's the first question. So someone, Jim Kales, said, attending to get good ideas to build agility among our teams. Team agility is really an important part of this. Agility just doesn't come in one flavor. Somebody says, Tamsin says, studying what it takes for the workplace to be future fit. Agility is one piece of what I think it takes, so would love to hear more. Our work climate continues to change and agility is more important than ever for our team. Tony said that. Glynis Jeffries said, re-entering the workplace as head of business development and marketing, part of a management team. So keen to know how it will help this new team. What a great way to start that. And another one says, Ellen says, our local economy has been built on retail, hospitality, and tourism. Oh my goodness, that has really been hit. Consumer behavior has changed differently, right? Ellen, it's a lot about pivoting and responding to the change. So we're going to be covering a lot of that, and we're going to be covering concepts. And then the rest of it is more of a learning circle environment that we're going to be establishing today, because you're going to be a part of this and be able to ask more questions specifically. So I will get started now with a few concepts about agility, and then tell a little bit of my story that Kathy touched on at the beginning. And I'm doing it like this so we can be interactive instead of you just witnessing a bunch of slide share. But let's talk about change. We mentioned there is so much change, and companies and individuals both do this. They deny it, they resist it. This is what we were all doing at the beginning of the pandemic. And then we get into just a state of depression. We call it despair. And at some point, we figure out, how do we integrate with that? How do we accept it? This change curve has been used in leadership development. It's part of the Kubler-Ross change curve developed in the 1960s. It still holds true today. The next concept, it's the concept of learning by doing. I call this the now normal. What we're in the middle of right now, it's not the new, it's not the old, it's like we're in this suspended state. And how do we accommodate all the change? There's so much change going on right now. I call it the high density learning curve. That shaded area there is what we're all in the middle of. How many of you have gotten better at conducting meetings remotely and managing remote teams? This is what happens. Another great concept of agility, to address some of the questions that came up earlier, is this notion that give yourself permission to experiment, learn, and adapt. This is inspired by Eric Ries's feedback loop that he created as he created the lean startup. It's a lean methodology. And as we experiment, we measure and we learn and we make adjustments, and we continue to do that. And we're doing this in more compressed times now. We don't have the luxury. We have to take the roles that we had before the pandemic and adjust and say, what are the needs that we have now that we didn't realize? Because there's a lot of people, as mentioned, the hospitality, tourism. I read an article this morning that a person in the hospitality space is now working in the healthcare recruitment space, and they learned from their role in hospitality the ability to listen and learn and be very empathetic to people's points of view. And they were able to roll that over into the recruitment space for healthcare. So I wrote a book called Activate Your Agile Career, but I don't like to write things unless I research them heavily. It took me 5 years to write that book. So here's some of the results of what I found out when I was interviewing people. I interviewed 120 people, and I commissioned primary research as well, survey research. And I found out that all of us fall on a spectrum between stagnation and agility, between stagnation and growth, between flexible and inflexible, between steadfast and agile. And usually when I poll people on this, they want to be right here. They see themselves as right here. And it'd be really curious if you have a moment, if I were to tell you on a scale of 1 to 5, where do you think you fall on this scale? What do you think it would be? You can offer that? That was quick poll creation there. So while we're doing that, I'd like to introduce the career agility model that came out of all of this. Now, I talk about it as being career agility, but there's a lot of things in here that are relevant to organizations as well. But let's talk about the individual, because it starts with the individual before it becomes part of the organization. So at the beginning of this, we don't know exactly what we want to do, whether it's mid-career or when we're in college or some kind of training. So we try to figure out who we are and what we do and what we don't know. Do you want to do that flexibility? Do you want to do that poll? I'd love to see the results.
So sharing the results now. So as you said, quick on the fly here. So please,
Yeah.
I noticed my typo, but we're set up.
Yeah, so that's really, it's true to form. That's how people, it's an aspirational thing. It's kind of part of a branding thing. We all want to be that. So we can close that one. Lisa, the poll. And so here's the career agility model. We start out here, we go through a whole design thinking phase, and this could be mid-career as well. This could be for your business. Who am I? What am I good at? What am I strong at? And at some point, we create a hypothesis. In this case, for business, it could be a pivot. We create a hypothesis where our business will be better. And then we get to this intersection here in the middle. It's an 8 on its side. And there's a series of things that, similar to the change curve. You don't have to go through all of them. You can go in different order, but things like adapting to change, creating an idea zone, pursuing things in parallel as you explore them, creating an awesome, badass feedback squad, I would say as well. And then you finish that, and then it's always thinking about what is happening in the environment, what's happening economically, financially, or in public health, like we're going through right now, what's happening, and how do we make adjustments in the change? And if you need to go back to the beginning and figure out more things, that's what you do. So it's an elegant model on a figure 8 on its side. And there's just 2 more here.
Give me one moment, Marty. I did get a question. So for those of you, if you are trying to make Marty's screen a little bit larger, if you go up to your upper right corner, there should be one called Speaker View or Gallery View. So depending on how your Zoom's set up, if you click on that, I'm going to see if that'll change things here. So as I'm speaking now, on my screen, I've clicked to Gallery, it makes it larger. So if you do want to see Marty's slides, click either Speaker or Gallery View, upper right corner. That should enlarge your screen or change it, and hopefully you can view things a little bit better. We do have these up as PowerPoint slides later, so we'll pull them back up for you.
Yeah. So this is what the last one looked like. I'm going to take my face away from it and put it all up into the screen just so you can see it a little bit more clearly. And so this one is talking about the traditional state of work. I talk about hiring for agility. In order to become an agile organization, you need to think about hiring for agility. The traditional state of work is like this, and this is what a lot of us experienced a long time ago, or not so long ago, that you start here, you're highly engaged, you're really excited about the work that you're doing, you master it. Everybody wants to master work, that's a good thing. But what's really not a good thing is when it declines. Your engagement suffers that way, the organization suffers. This is the traditional state of work that we want to change. The way to do this is what I call, let's enter the project economy. It's not just that 35 to 40% of our workforce is already working in a consultant, gig economy, worker sort of way, but within the organization, we can think about this as well. How do we keep people engaged within the organization? You take one project, and just as it gets less interesting, you're already navigating to something that is more interesting. You could do this. Let's talk about the role of marketing. You could do this in several aspects of marketing and continue on and be much more engaged than if you just mastered the technique of data analytics and didn't know where else to go with that. There's a lot of things you can do for that. So this is the future of work. It's a series of projects. The more that individuals think about this, they're going to be more engaged in their work. So now we can get to the slides. We just have 4. They're real quick, about 30 seconds each. So a lot of people ask me, how did you get, how did you create an agility model? What gave you the idea? I'm a little bit geeky in this way, in that I've always worked around technology companies, and I've marketed really strange. In my former life, I was a marketer, I was a designer, and I noticed that these engineers, these software engineers in particular, were processing their work through agile software development. And I thought, this is just so great. And I got involved with a group of global marketers, about 25 of us in San Francisco. In 2012, we created an agile marketing manifesto. We applied agile principles to the profession of marketing so that we too could collaborate, run sprints, and learn and adjust to be more flexible and responsive to the market. So at 30,000 feet, when I was on the way home from that event, I thought, why couldn't this apply to the individual agility mindset? And I got so excited about it. I started writing about it 8 years ago. And if you type in the words career agility now on your browser, my work will come up, because that did not exist in 2012. So next slide. So Kathy asked me, how did you get interested in this? And this was my moment, my childhood moment really was, I was totally immobilized at the age of 13. I call it total. It was from the waist up to the neck. And I was wearing a full body brace because I had a curvature. And this was one way of growing a little bit and in lengthening that curvature so I wouldn't have pain later on. It was a horrible thing for a 13-year-old going into high school to deal with. And I just felt so stuck. I just thought, what am I going to do? I didn't have the mental capacity when it first happened. Like, what am I going to do with this? And I'm sure everyone, whether you're a business or an individual, has felt stuck at some time. So next slide. So, as I go into this, the rest of that story is I made a decision when I was 13 that I wasn't going to let this get the best of me. I may have been immobilized and I couldn't do swimming, I couldn't do sports, I couldn't do dances, I couldn't sit at football games and that kind of thing, but I had control of my mental capacity and my mental abilities. So I focused on my own mental agility, studied really hard, got into the college of my choice, made really great friends, and dreamt almost every day of what it would be like when that brace came off. And as that brace came off, not just 1 month, not just 1 year, but 3.5 years later, when that brace came off, I just thought I could absolutely do anything I set my mind to. So in many ways, that was a very positive influence in my life. So what do I do with all these agility? I learned it as a child. I was up in the airplane and thought about applying these principles. And I wrote a book about from the individual's perspective, but my real passion was how do we apply this to organizations? And what do organizations want? Every organization wants happy, profitable employees. Not just from the perspective of the organization, but the individual has to feel that as well. It's a two-way street. And I say to organizations and individuals, cultivate career agility, don't fight it. And this happens to be the title of a white paper I wrote directly to organizations and to individuals. It's a 30-page white paper on this topic, and all of you are going to get access to it when Lisa sends out the follow-up email. So for your participation here, you're going to get a little bonus material here. So we'll go to the next slide. It's actually the last slide before our conversation. And one of the charts in this white paper is agility isn't just about what a person thinks. People used to say, oh, career agility, that's people job hopping, right, Marty? I said, no, it's not. It's so much more than that. It's about growth. It's about a mindset focus. It's about career evolution. It's about business evolution. It's about integrating learning agility into your organization. And it's about allowing your people to have workplace experimentation as a value. Individual workers that are agile are curious. They respond to change. They view their career as a series of projects. They're highly engaged. Agile leadership then is able to work with a workforce that's both alternative and permanent. As I said before, almost 40% of our workforce is in the alternative workforce. So as leaders, we have to figure out how to manage all of that too. It's not just the people that work for us or come into work or work remotely as we are right now. And the organizational benefits are just, really it's about you can respond to change more rapidly. It's been said that the innovation and experimentation, the experimentation leads to innovation. If you don't have experimentation, you don't have that, and you have increased worker ROI. So on that note, these are some of the benefits, and I wanted to mention just a few companies that didn't follow this type of mindset, and they go back 10 years. We can go back to Blockbuster Video. We can go back to just stalwart companies like BlackBerry. Does everybody remember BlackBerry? It was the dominant player of for executives and businesses. And they missed the mark on they assumed that everybody needed a keyboard on their mobile phone. And we had Nokia didn't see the smartphone coming, same thing. And on some of the marketing materials that we sent out, we talked about Hertz and a couple other Zales, Jewelers. These big companies are companies that we thought would be around forever are filing for bankruptcy. So this is the downside of what can happen if you're not adapting to change, if you're not adaptable. As an individual, the downside is you become irrelevant really fast. So as an organization, if we are not thinking about what are the roles that we need to advance? What are the upskilling and the reskilling initiatives that we have to get going in our organization so that we can continue to flourish out of this situation that we're in right now in our public health situation. And I'd like to open up the conversation here with Kathy and others that are participating today.
Yes, Marty, thank you so much. I think, you know, the one question I have right out of the gate is there's that agility versus steadfast sort of access, and can you just kind of speak to that you know, characteristics of a steadfast versus more agile?
Thank you, Lisa. Magic. Yeah, so, you know, we can say stagnation, we can say steadfast. They are similar. One's a little bit more positive. There are roles that being steadfast is critically important. And we're talking the roles that are more up on this other side of the growth pattern are in the business environment. They're not necessarily mastering a technique on the manufacturing floor. So that could be a very positive aspect of a person that is steadfast, knows their work, and is willing to reproduce it in the way that makes for great products. However, even with someone who does things repetitively, it can also be a challenge if that person isn't thinking about what is it that I can do to help grow.
You know, another thought, Marty, I had was when you were talking about experimentation. I love that thought in theory, but it's difficult. Experimentation sounds so great, and psychological safety obviously needs to be in place in your organization and to really successfully iterate, in my view. But we've all grown up being scored for, you know, getting things right. We all are striving for an A or an A+. So how do you bring that experimentation philosophy to a workplace to get people to iterate and be more agile?
Yeah, so there's what we call Agile Transformation is going on maybe in about 12 to 15% of the companies right now. It's a hard thing to adapt to this Agile Transformation, but people, the way that it works best is to not take it on as a huge, big project, break it down into a smaller, low-hanging fruit type of win. So if you're in HR, for instance, and you're trying to assess what are the roles that are going to be important, because some of them aren't relevant right now, not just because of the pandemic, just because of technology and automation. And a lot of times people get stuck because that assessment is like a 6-month analysis. It goes on and on. There's a committee. Let's break it down. Let's explore 2 particular areas or roles, add them, upskill for them, and see how that works out. Create a small experiment. Get some success under your belt before you make it bigger.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be hugely important for both people in a career search as well as, you know, organizations. I mean, we've just seen such incredible pivots from people that are one day, you know, making pizzas, and the next day they're making PPE equipment. So it's fascinating, and I, you know, can't get enough of seeing how people are using innovation and thinking more agilely. Lisa,
we actually had one of our audience members weigh in. Tony said one positive fact of everything, you know, struggling with our typical business and current COVID pandemic is that it is forcing us to experiment in order to survive. So love the sentiment. I've actually got a few questions coming in I'd love to answer from our audience. So first one comes from Jasmine. It's a 2-part one for you, Marty. So she writes, I appreciate you are seeing a continuum on the stagnation and growth curve, but in some roles, steadfastness is essential, and that doesn't necessarily mean no growth. So how can we consider agility even with role commitment, is how she put it.
Yeah, so if it's a role, say it's one function of marketing that a person is really, really good at, and they actually don't want to gravitate or advance in a way that another person would. So I used the example earlier of the data analytics. If someone just really loves to grind through the analytics and provide the insights, one of the ways that they could think about growth is to not just do the technical aspects of the analytics, but to really get into the insights and the growth, and how can I take this data and help the next person that's going to take this data, make it a little bit easier for them to understand the data. These insights are hard to extract from the data at times. So I think that would be an example of a growth, of someone becoming more strategic. So whatever it is that you're doing, there's always something you can do to add on growth, even though it's not a complete role change.
Yeah, I was going to just add on to an experience, or to a company I knew that they were accounting firm. They were contemplating transforming to the great game of business, so being open book. And I was kind of stunned by the fact that accounting, that they wouldn't really understand the business impact of the financials that they were looking at day in and day out. And until they connected to, you know, that more transparent view of their own organization and how, you know, the checks and balances needed to be in place, it really was a huge eye opener. So I love that, you know, even with an accounting firm where you would naturally think they'd get, you know, an income statement and the implications on the business, they were just doing the numbers. They were just doing the input. So I think that's so interesting to see how things can, you know, just with a little more information, you can really involve a mindset.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that too. I worked with a CFO at my last growth stage tech company in the mobile security space. And he, after years of experience in accounting and being a CFO and all that, he was probably one of the most strategic people on the management team. I was the chief marketer on that particular management team, and he was so good. He was good for pitching to investors because he knew the numbers, but he was also, I would use him as a confidant when I was trying to figure out certain marketing strategies. He just was so good. He understood the market very well. And he was also very receptive when it came to, you know, asking me like, well, why should I spend, you know, 6% on this on the budget? You know, he was always very receptive if I would bring him data. He was a data guy, so it goes both ways. I became more data centric so that I could make the case to get a bigger budget for my department.
So I'm going to jump back in here. We're going to answer the second part of Tasman's questions. And I actually have two questions from Glynis and Larry that are similar regarding teams. Actually, so is Tasman's too. So the second part of Tasman's question, I'm also interested in the relationship you see, Marty, between agility and resilience. And we're going to frame resilience not as it's usually defined, but looking at resilience as being collectively useful to the workforce. So the agility of the team and others, not just yourself.
Right, right. So I get that question a lot, Tasman, and about its relationship to resilience. People get right away, oh, you have to be resilient and persistent and all this sort of thing if you want to be agile. And I think this all boils down to training and culture. Everything boils down to culture. If the organization believes and makes available the training for this, the power skills, they call them, resilience, learning, communication, agility. If organizations have a formal way of extending this knowledge of how to be like this and how to do like this, it's just as important as the upskilling of a technical skill or the reskilling of something that's no longer needed because it's automated.
Kathy, anything you want to add to that before we switch into our team-focused questions?
No, let's go. Let's get to the questions. I love it.
So I'm going to kind of group one question from Glynis and one from Larry, both for around teams. So I'm going to phrase both of them for you, Marty. So Larry's question is, when leading a team, how do you know if you're striking the right balance between agility and consistency so you're not losing engagement from too much change? And then Glynis had a question that's a little similar, like if you've got a cross-functional team, is that being agile? Are you engaging in agile behaviors? You know, how are those kind of both playing together?
These are really complex questions, and as you were framing them out, I started thinking in my mind. You can see I do a lot through drawing. My whole Instagram channel is little drawings, so I was drawing right away what this looks like. And I think people that can think about, you might not know what an agile team is. You might not know what a scrum master is, but I guarantee you, you will know in the future, because this is the way that organizations are going to grow. They work on projects together. They often have cross-functional aspects of them, and they are short scrum meetings that they have on a regular basis, and they break everything down into small enough sprints so that they all understand what is going on, what's working, what's not, and getting that done. And they often complement that whole organizational structure with a project manager. Not always, but having a project management background, I love having a project manager in that team so that everyone's voice is heard and that we're able to take these projects that we want to move forward and do so.
Yeah, I recently described it to one of our new employees like a relay race, you know, that there had to be that baton handoff between different individuals on the team and communication. And it could be verbal and nonverbal, but we just had to, you know, we had to know our place, what sequences are gonna take place in getting something to the finish line. And it really was like running a relay race between, and I'm sure it gets more complex, you know, that's like one person handing off to another person, and some teams need multiple people working together, you know, in different sequences, like maybe in a hospital or operating room where you're doing a surgery or something like that.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that, this will be a yes and, there are handoffs, but there's also things, particularly in project management ease, there's things that you can break down the program and you can break down what can be done in parallel and what can be done in sequence. And we used to only do things in sequence, and now in these teams, there's lots of relays going on projects that are being done in parallel. So it's a lot of moving parts. It's like an orchestra of things working together, and all having, and the main thing is having the goal in front of you and having those meetings. Where are we at? How are we doing? And if we're having a challenge, what are the adjustments that we have to make to this deadline or not? It's like when Kennedy said we're going to put a man on the moon in 10 years, they did it in 10 years. It was a goal, it was a mission, it was a rallying cry. And we would like to think that the things that really cannot move, like a trade show or something, the date's not going to change. So you can't change those dates, but other things you can. You know, certain product development pieces, you absolutely can.
So one quick question, Marty, you listed right before this 4 power skills. Could you repeat those for the audience?
I repeated resilience, communication, agility. There's probably a dozen of them. Let me see. I'm forgetting. I have 3 of them on the top of my head, but it's the kind of skills that are necessary to empathy is probably the number 1. Empathy is the biggest power skill. And agility is probably right behind it. Communication, in fact, you could argue that communication could be number 1. But I think that those kind of skills are just as important. The other power skill that isn't talked about as much, but we say that it's necessary for us to exist as companies today, is creativity. If we don't have creativity, we don't have innovation, we don't have new products, we can't continue. We will fade away.
So speaking of kind of your team and those skills, obviously we want to cultivate those with our employees. Have you seen any effective reward systems to help promote agility within a company?
So now we're getting into extrinsic and extrinsic rewards. An extrinsic reward would be, money, something like that, or a party. Intrinsic would be, it has to do with the culture and how a person feels about their commitment to that goal. So a lot of times the reward system, in sales, the reward systems are contests. So sometimes as simple as a contest can be very successful. It doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna, win a car or anything, but it could be just something that you get an award for. I know I worked on a committee for an association I was working on, and it's sitting over here, I got the Wordsmith Award, and it was totally a surprise. And it made me want to work really hard and do more volunteer work for this association. And it's an award. So I think it's the classic stuff. It's the classic stuff that kids get. I was a swimmer. You get these swimming ribbons and trophies.
So go ahead, Kathy.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to your one diagram because I was thinking about our younger workforce, and obviously we've had such a shift in unemployment and things like that. But you talk about agility, but in my experience with working with younger people, there is some need for them to see a career path. I would hear, like, what's my next step? Before they've barely been in their first step, they're asking about their next step. So I'm wonder what your thoughts are around that type of thinking for both employers and employees, because I felt like that was the one thing that stuck out to me that I haven't exactly seen play out on, and I don't know, Lisa, it's the diagram of all the different.
Oh, is it the agility model?
Well, it doesn't matter. Go ahead, and if you wouldn't mind kind of giving your thoughts.
Okay. So I was chatting. I'm a mentor to a lot of people, and I mentored a millennial person that has grown up in her career, and she would come to me like after a few months. Oh, those VPs don't know what they're doing. She worked at a PR firm. She said, those VPs don't know what they're doing, and I got to get out of here. And I said, talk to me. What's bothering you? And she said, well, there's a lot of things that are broken. And I go, well, why don't you stay and fix it? And she goes, well, what do you mean? I go, well, start talking to some, your boss and other people in the organization. I go, what's your idea? And she goes, well, a lot of our new people that are graduating are getting burnt out in New York, and they're leaving within 6 months. And he said, I think, we need training. And I said, well, do you want to do that? And she said, well, yeah, I'd like to. I said, pitch it. Get some feedback from the people within the organization, pitch it. And so in her case, she created 3 unique roles within the organization over a period of about 8 or 9 years. So I think a lot of people, and it's not just young people, but we all need a mentor. We all need someone to talk to. We need reverse mentoring. We need regular mentoring, and that we need someone to talk to. So I think this energy and wanting to get to the next thing, it's very normal. It's different than the way that it was, the way that the workplace was before. But I think it's challenging us in ways that, what can we do as leaders to engage this person? Maybe it's getting them involved in a really cool project that speaks to their soul.
A great point, Marty. I know we talked a lot about mentorship. I'm actually going to go ahead and put a poll on the screen just to see where everyone's at. Marty was talking to me previously as we got ready for this webinar about the importance of having a mentor. And there's a target age range. So while they're answering the question, Marty, would you mind explaining why you feel that 10 to 15 years is a good sweet spot for a mentor?
Yeah, so what's happened is you can say if you had a mentor that's 10 to 15 years older, but 80% of the people generally say no. And the reason is we don't all have that perfect mentor. And what do we do instead? Well, I created this thing called the Activate Your Feedback Squad. You have reverse mentoring, you have a peer group, you have mastermind groups that you could participate in to get feedback on how you want to do something. So in the case of the millennial that I was working with, I was that ideal older person. So it looks like some of them may have. So the vast majority of them have had mentors 10 to 15 years older. That's not typical in an audience in corporations, but I think it's super important. But understand that the definition of a mentor can be a lot of different things. They don't have to be 10 to 15 years older, and they don't have to be long-term. It could be as simple as, I call them opportunistic mentorship. You're working on a program, you've never done it before, you don't know how to do it, but you know someone knows a lot about that, and you ask them and you chat with them over a period of a week or two. You know, situational mentorship, situational feedback. So don't wait for the organization to give you a mentor.
Well, and I think it's great. It actually speaks, I want to go back up. Glynis had asked a question a little bit earlier that also plays into a question that we had ahead of time that I've been holding. So Glynis wanted to know, how do you encourage people who are currently struggling with unemployment to become agile? And I know, Marty, one of the other questions I got in is, how can I continue to flex my agile muscles? So I'm going to pull back up your project chart, because I know you had some really great insights there.
Yeah, so the project economy, it's really thinking about to become more agile. There's principles. It's collecting ideas on a regular basis, cross-pollinating your thinking. So if you are really into accounting, it might be a great thing for you also to have a hobby in astronomy, where you see patterns in a different way. And so these are ways that you can cultivate an agile mindset that might not be as visible to you, and to really collect ideas, not just on where you want to go with your work and what your vision is, but collect ideas. If you have just a crazy idea about something in the workplace, document it, save it. It may not be applicable right now, but make certain that you have that at the ready when you're at the next brainstorm meeting. So these are things. And then speaking to the slide, the project economy, it's the more you can break things down into projects, you can keep yourself more engaged. So you may be on this big program. Break it down into 4 discrete projects, create an energy and excitement about it. And even with job seekers and job searchers, I'm doing a job searching talking points workshop in a couple weeks. And it's really about being flexible and taking courses in personal branding, understanding how to create really lively talking points or smart talking points, and breaking that down into a big project. Because something like personal branding can be totally overwhelming for the new job seeker. It's like, oh, wait a minute, I didn't realize this was going to be 180 hours worth of work. Just break it down into a couple small pieces, and maybe just start with your talking points. That's part of your mission. That's part of your values. It's part of your brand values behind me. It's that kind of thing. Get into one of those kinds of exercises for yourself and get engaged with it. And that engagement and enthusiasm will come out in your interviews.
So on that note, Marty, is there any interview questions in particular that employers should be considering asking to sort of suss out agility in a potential hire?
I think it's some of it's more typical. It's asking them how they've responded to a particular thing, or not even asking them a question. The better way to get it at the inside of how a person is to say, tell me a story about a time when something happened and how did you grapple with it? So tell me a time when failure was on the horizon, you knew it was going to be a failure. It happens. What did you do? Those are the things that are going to get at it, rather than saying, tell me your vision of 5 years, or, you know, we want to give them something that is challenging and isn't this perfect story that they weave for themselves for the interview.
Great.
We want to paint the scenario.
So I had another question come in, Marty, and I know you've shared a really cool experience. So for all of our business owners, or just a personal thing, so we talked earlier about being agile, experimentation. There's that fear of putting something out there that feels half-baked. Maybe you've got it started. I know you're working on a cool project right now for the state of Illinois that maybe you could help illustrate that point of, it's not a bad thing in an agile mindset to put something out there and figure it out as you go.
Right. So the one thing that I used to think of early on in my career is like, it has to be perfect. Everything has to be done. And what I learned from the software engineers way back when is you test smaller bits and you put it out there and you share it. You share your ideas. You know, who knew sharing ideas? Like, you know, 20 years ago, people kept everything so close to them and didn't want to release it because it was proprietary. And these days, so much of it is about sharing. Like, you know, I've been working on this project. Like this woman, I got to tell you this really cool story. She writes a newsletter called Encourageizers. She's in career services at University of Chicago. And she came up with this cool project called, I want to get 1 million acts of encouragement between whatever she started and the end of the year. And she created a simple form. You don't have to put a name. You just have to put what state it was in, and then what state you're in, and how did you feel about it?
Exactly.
And it's not like, she didn't make it like a whole big website. It's like, it's a little form. And I just loved it, and I'm spreading it. And I want to make 1 million. I mean, I want to help her. So I think her project is gonna just absolutely explode because she put it out there before it was perfect.
Well, anybody that works at Red Caffeine knows I'm the queen of half-baked ideas. I love partially baking something and having a lot of collaboration out around getting it to the finish line, that's for sure.
You must like what is that molten chocolate cake that is like half, like it's part of it's just really luscious chocolate.
My go-to dessert.
It pours out of the center that's baked.
Right. So Marty, I wanted to ask one more question around the profitable employers and employees. Can you just expand on that? I know, we play the great game of business, so we're really keyed into making sure everybody understands their impact. So how does that play out in other organizations or for?
Well, when people are properly treated and properly remunerated, proper salary, there's a certain balance about it all. So that kind of profit from the standpoint of the individuals totally get. But what they need to understand, and with the relationship that they have with their employer, the employers need to make profits so that they can exist. There was a model that I was introduced to 20 years ago. It was, you could tell the size of a company if they were a consulting company by multiplying, like if it was 20 consultants and say it was $100,000 a year, whatever it was at the time, and you could multiply that out. And so if each person doesn't make $200,000 a year or $100,000 a year, the organization will not be profitable. That's just services. But I think the more that individuals understand the mechanisms that it takes for a company to be successful too, and that it is a two-way street. It's understanding, the employees now are much more free agents than they used to be. But that's where we've evolved to. That's not good, that's not bad. In fact, in some cases, I think it's very good. But it doesn't have to, it can be a very good tension, if you will, that an organization has with employees, because you don't stay with an organization forever. It doesn't happen. Our stats say it as such. But when you're there, you want to be there 110%, and you just want to give it your all. Those are the kind of employees you want. And that's the expectation that the employer deserves.
I could not.
Well, Marti, thank you so much for all of your great advice, your insights, most of all, your energy. Absolutely wonderful to have you here today. So for those of you, if you think of a question for Marti later, feel free to reach out to her on LinkedIn. You can also email her at marti@constantchange.com. You can go to her website too. So as Marti mentioned earlier, one of our takeaways today, besides this great recording, which all of you will be receiving, or if you're watching afterwards, I hope you enjoy this content as well. We'll also be sending out Marti's white paper that she referenced a few times. So great insights and finding. I have actually pored over it myself, but something you'll definitely want to read to help you involve those agile principles within your business or your own personal life as well.
Yeah, and they'll have access to the Career Agility Guide as well. So it's, both of them, for attending today. So appreciated spending the time with you. Loved your questions. Your questions are what I live for. So thank you for that. They give me a lot of content for writing. I write a ton.
Yes, definitely follow Marti's blog. So as a special bonus today, I wanted to call it, which we didn't share earlier, we want to thank you for your participation. This honestly makes the session, as Marti said. So Tom, Glynis, and Tasman, you have actually won Marti's book. So I'll be emailing you to connect to get your mailing address to get that sent out to you. So congratulations and thank you for participating today.
Yeah, and if you ever want to talk about it or have a coffee chat, on my weekly newsletter, I open up for coffee chats for just about anybody. I like talking business, I like talking careers, I like talking growth, and I really appreciate meeting new and interesting people.
Well, speaking of new and interesting people, we're looking forward to our next session, which is August 25th. We are going to be speaking with Moises Noreña. He is the Vice President of Innovation at Moen and has also been with Allstate and Whirlpool in his 20 plus years in innovation. So just as Marti was sharing today, that arc of innovation, agility, and creativity, Moises is really going to break things down for us on how no matter what size of business you are, you can implement innovative principles and kind of the process behind them to make sure that they keep going, and some key things you want to avoid when you set up an innovation process at your company. So as we continue on this path, this will be the second out of 4 webinars that we're doing that are really going to focus on thinking differently. So we look forward to you tuning in. This will be available on our website, redcaffeine.com, as far as the recording, and you can also register for Moises' session on our website as well.
Thank you so much, Red Caffeine, Kathy, and Lisa, and all of you that asked such powerful questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marti. If this was your first time attending a Business as Unusual webinar, we hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions for Kathy or I, feel free to reach out to us at connect@redcaffeine.com, and we look forward to speaking with you.